Welcome to Law Pod. My name is Alice Diver from the School of Law. I'm joined by Kyung Eun this morning from Human Rights Beyond Borders. This episode ties in essentially with the episodes from last year's symposium involving Cairn and Adopt NI and various other adoptee groups. So what we're going to be talking about this morning is all things to do with adoption. It's timely because Northern Ireland is currently going through truth recovery process for mothers and adoptees, victims, survivors. But I will hand you over to Kyung. She will tell you a little bit about herself, her NGO. She has a book as well that she's going to tell us about, and then we will talk adoption.
Thank you.
Welcome to Belfast. I know you've been on the big wheel.
Yes. I came yesterday when I arrived in the airport of Belfast. I was like, it is so unrealistic. I came all the way from South Korea, stayed in London for a week, and then I flew to Belfast. I cannot imagine. It is so unbelievable to, how I can end it up here in Northern Ireland, Belfast. The world is connected. Everything is connected, not only individual lives, but also the acts of states. Mm-hmm. What the states are doing, it is all connected, and this is the result. And now it is time that something is changing. First, I have to introduce myself. My name is Kyung-eun Lee, and I'm from Seoul, South Korea. I'm currently a director of Human Rights Beyond Borders, an NGO that I and my colleagues have founded. We are focusing on the right to origins. That is our ultimate motto, that the right to origin is realized for all people in the world. It is not only, concerned about intercountry adoptees, but the reason that we are focusing on intercountry adoptees is that they are a group of people who are showing the reality of the people who are deprived of that right to know their true origins and true identities. It is really human rights. That's what we have learned and realized during the recent years that we have worked on this issue and worked with intercountry adoptees from South Korea.
I know you mentioned just this morning there that yet another European country has decided that international adoptions will not continue to happen. I know there's nearly been a domino effect across Europe as states are realizing, well, I'll let you explain it better than me. But
intercountry adoption is a really global issue. That it is a children's movement. It has been happening for more than 7 decades. It has impact on millions of people in the world. More than 100 countries are participating in intercountry adoption practice. Among those countries, about 24 are receiving babies, and more than 80 are sending out their own babies to those receiving countries. This is the movement of babies, children. Usually it is under young babies movement, the flow in one direction, from global south to global north. So it is only, the number of receiving countries were maintained relatively small, only 24 in Northern America and Western Europe and Australia. But I have been traveling to Western European countries to meet the experts and governments in those countries since 2022. And I can see those days the general idea and understanding surrounding intercountry adoption has gone through big changes, fundamental changes, and the understanding of the governments of receiving countries in Western European countries has changed a lot, made a very fundamental changes. And some of the countries has really started to take an action to stop bringing children into their countries. That is a huge change that we have never witnessed so far. Since 2022, the HRBB is traveling to give consultation to those, Western European receiving countries' government, the evidence about the human rights violation, and providing knowledges and information, and sharing the information that we have found out so far with them, with those policymakers. That is our main goal these days.
Adoptees, I think, as we age, are starting to get more of a voice. I know younger adoptees have come into the world with more of a voice. But my generation was always traditionally told to be quiet.
Okay.
What I love about your book,
right.
Your book grasps the nettle and it talks about orphans.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that orphan, in law anyway, is not necessarily... orphans are promoted as being adoptable and eligible for adoption. In a sense, are they genuinely orphans, or is this a legal fiction? Is that maybe why there's a bit of a sea change? Are people realizing that some orphanages are not actually orphanages?
Yes. You talked about, I understand that you talked about the activism of adoptees. Korean adoptees are the first generation of Korean adoptees. They are now who were adopted in 1970s and 80s. They began to form adoptee group in those countries that they live in. So if I may describe the situation about adoptees' lives, they are living in receiving countries, and those countries that they were born and sent out, like South Korea. In South Korea, this issue is really low social awareness because they are not there. They are all living in the receiving countries. They are citizens of those countries. When they were adopted, when they were very young, the nationality that they were born with in the state of origin has been cancelled when they were adopted, when they crossed the border, and when they were adopted in receiving countries. They get the citizenship and nationality of receiving countries. They are not citizens of the state of origin anymore, and they don't have any voices there. It is very hard because of the language and cultural differences. It is very hard for adoptees to have some kind of activism there. But they have been really, powerful. Adoptee activism is now spreading not only from the adoptees of South Korea, but other, states of origins. They are giving the source of the power to make the changes that we are witnessing now. And you talk about the aging process of such adoptee groups. Now they are who first started the adoptee activism when they were 20s.
Yes.
Yeah, they started it. So it is like, early 1990s.
Yeah.
Now they are in their 40s and 50s.
They're just getting warmed up. They're just getting into the prime of life.
Right.
Which is great, but there's a lot to learn.
Yes.
To learn.
Yeah. But, the adoptee activism is like they are moving to other directions with some young generations. I'm really reluctant to, naming special states of origin, but like China, because the population is huge from that country. Chinese adoptees are now making voices, and India and other, it is noticeable that adoptees were raised in the receiving countries. But when I met them, the character of the states of origin is inside individual adoptees. That is why these days I'm really wondering if something is in blood and if something is in DNA, how big it is. I was always wondering about that when I met adoptees. I'm not an adoptee.
You're an ally. It's okay.
But
we can't be perfect.
It is interesting that when the adoptees are trying to reach out to me, in so many cases, their first question is, are you adopted too?
Yes. Yeah, it's a thing. We like to check if people can speak adoptee in the first place, because we sometimes have our own language. I'm just speaking on behalf of all my people there in a sweeping generalization, but just we have a tendency to find each other. I don't know why that is. It's not the normal opening line of a conversation. It's not a good first date or meeting question to ask someone, were you kept or were you adopted? But yeah, if someone has an interest in it, quite often either they know someone or their family's been affected by it, so we need people to take an interest so that it's not seen as this strange, rare thing. There's a lot of us out there that people just don't assume.
Yeah, and sometimes they feel that it is polite to say nothing about the background of the family formation and why the skin colors are different between parents and child. I heard sometimes that color blindness can be a solution, but sometimes it can be a dangerous idea.
Color denial, if you pretend
that
something isn't an issue, it can become much more of an issue.
Yeah, that is completely different from non-discrimination. Yeah, we misunderstand that we pretend, we are not discriminating something is something we are not trying to see it. Or we just, blind our eyes ourselves and we turn our eyes and close our ears. That can never be a solution for something wrong about humanity. This is humanity. We know, we can understand it because we are all human.
Yeah.
It is like the, common expression is elephant in the room.
Yeah.
There are huge elephant in the room.
Yeah.
But if we pretend that there are not, and that is not solution at all.
It's not. I guess it ties in with adoption's long history of privacy, secrecy, shame and stigma, the usual things. Some of my generation would be not everybody knew they were adopted. You might have only found out when you found paperwork or when a family member told you. I have friends, I have cousins who only found out in their 40s or 50s. That can be quite the shock. The thinking would have been, even in trying to match genetic characteristics with parents to children, the thinking was, no one needs to know, and we can keep this a secret, and no one will ever know. And then, yes, human nature, secrets have a habit of getting out.
Yeah.
DNA has actually brought some adoptee problems to people that discover, non-paternity event, or the terminology has changed. I'm using the wrong old-fashioned term. But yeah, people are discovering that genetic ties are sometimes mythical.
Right. The deep sentiment that lies in this phenomenon is that it is better for adoptees or the mothers who relinquish their kids. It is the belief that they can live just like nothing happened. But such thing is impossible. And I heard a lot of times from adoptees that adoption is lifelong. So adoption does not end when they were adopted, when they were babies. The adoption is finalized, but that is not end of the story. When they grow old and when they have their own family, when they have their own child, and when that child have their own child, it's just going on and on.
Yeah, intergenerational.
Yes, it is a lifelong story. So we cannot live just as if nothing happened. It is impossible. We have to face this. That's what you talked about, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And the first step is truth. So we already, the human community, that is international community, we have already in the United Nations set up that the process that how we can face such a huge and phenomenon and human rights violation status by the state, by official authorities. So there are steps that the United Nations suggested: truth, justice, and the third part is, somebody say reparation, and I would say, and in this case, rectification.
Yes.
We have to rectify what is wrong. So first we have to realize what is wrong, what really happened, what the receiving country's government and in sending countries, Truth and Reconciliation Committee, and this word, the human community, what we are doing at this stage is we have to know the truth. So this is the first part.
That's the tough part.
But we are starting. It may take 10 years or 20 years, but at least we have to start. Yeah, I think this is, we have started. This is a big step.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how I understand this current situation. And we have to know truth. First, we have to know the truth. And the second one is justice. And the second step is justice. Justice is about to decide who and which organization is accountable. It does not mean that we are going to send them to jail. But
sadly.
Yeah.
Church, state, there's culpability.
And the private organizations. The justice is we have to know who are accountable for what. So that is very important that we are not making the same mistakes in the future.
Exactly. Yeah. I love David Smolin's take on it. He talks of child trafficking, and you were saying earlier, child laundering. As James Smith said about Ireland, the architectures of containment contained mothers. The industrial complex of adoption. In Ireland, it was discovering the burial records and death records and noticing a lot of infants are missing. Where did they go? Did they go abroad or are they buried somewhere? So there's an awful darkness underpinning a lot of it. The truth part, the unpleasant truths, sometimes with money involved and changing hands, which is very triggering for adoptees of whatever age.
But in regards of intercountry adoption, it is 100%, I would say, it is industry. It was market. Because from the perspective of sending countries, maybe there are some exceptions from 1990s, but from the perspective of states of origin, what kind of government can use intercountry adoption as the tool for its national child welfare, child protection system? It is impossible. If you are a government, at least, you cannot choose it as a policy tool for the protection of children.
And yet they did, if we look at
England
and Ireland and
but
send these children abroad.
If it is really, can I use
it's dehumanizing.
Democratic country. But anyway, if it is a, appropriate modern country as a government, it is impossible to use that. From the perspective of receiving countries, I think they just allow private agencies to do this. Just turn blind eyes.
Yes, which gets the government off the hook, potentially. And the churches, of course, will say, we are doing good work.
So as a result, this practice stay in the hands of private agencies.
Interesting, because the sort of public-private divide, I know I want to ask you about human rights. I want your opinion on a couple of things. I say Northern Ireland's at the early stage of redress, truth recovery, and so on. And one of the suggestions being floated in the proposed redress scheme, is that private institutions will be excluded from redress. So the public mother and baby homes, church, state, fine. But if there was a private institution, and that's where you went to have your baby, and then to relinquish them, have them adopted, mother and child apparently will not be eligible in the same way that someone who spent a day, I think they've decided 24 hours will be the benchmark. So why the discrimination? Why that divide with public-private?
Let's see it from the perspective of the mothers of the families who are very vulnerable and desperate. Do they know the difference between public and private about the agencies? If they provide the services and they are so accustomed to the public services of British government, they get the recognition from worldwide very high standard of social welfare. If you are a citizen of such country, and of an institution is providing such families, providing such services to rural women and family, do they understand the difference between private and public? And if that is allowed, if such a situation is allowed by the government, that is also the responsibility, accountability of the government.
That's the trouble, is getting them to admit to having had oversight. I'm thinking of the UK's non-apology, their refusal to apologise. Had another question we were mentioning or talking earlier about human rights aspect.
Okay.
And again, harking back to the public consultation here, another question had to do with the rights issues. I think the consultation document said human rights, they're important. We will not potentially focus exclusively on them because they might be too narrow. And would we probably want to look at the systemic rights abuses instead, or in addition to, it was a bit unclear of that. And a few people, discussions over the summer with other adoptees, we were a bit and I spoke to a few human rights people as well. Where do the systemic abuses fit with human rights? Are they a subdivision? Are they the same thing? Are they very separate? If you can say, for example, if you say, well, that was a systemic abuse, it was society's fault. And I'm looking at the Irish Commission of Investigations. It was a systemic violation, therefore the state couldn't help it because it was social and cultural. Therefore, it's not our fault, so maybe we don't have to pay redress. Or am I being just very unnecessarily cynical?
I think myself, my identity is human rights law researcher, international human rights law researcher in Global South country. And when we are talking about the human rights means that it is the right. We are not talking about all rights are human rights. They have risen. And human rights means sometimes people ask me, what is human rights? I answer them, human rights is the right that you have just because you are a human being. So it does not mean, so you are a nice human being, nice people, nice person, so you can have, such rights, but you are not good enough to enjoy human rights. It's something that you have, whether you are young, baby, or you are old enough. This is human rights is the right that you have by birth just because you are a human being. But can you list it? Can you argue it in the court? So that's why United Nations exists. Universal Declaration on Human Rights was established in the United Nations, and since then, international human rights laws and legal norms have been developing and expanding enormously. This is the field that we are working on, the right to know origin and true identity, and the rights of the children, rights of the child. This is developing in the United Nations Forum recently, but it is growing fast. Yeah, it is developing fast. So we cannot say, you talked about the response of the TRC here. They're saying that it is human rights or not.
I just thought it was a strange issue for them to focus upon. You would think it would be an expansive issue that was said, we're going to include as many, because we're taking testimony, we're gathering in testimonies from victims and survivors, and this will serve as evidence.
I think it is their turn to prove that it is not part of human rights.
It's nearly like we can cut these little bits out. And mention was made of the Human Rights Act coming in 2000. So there was mention of that in the document as well, saying governments would not really have been aware. The European Convention was signed up to.
Yes,
European Convention time ago
on human rights and European Convention on adoption.
And while it's not binding, I don't think you can really pretend that, we weren't bound in any way by it. I just thought it was a bit strange. It's like the UK stance on the apology of we didn't really know, therefore we're not responsible. And the public purse got mentioned a few times in the document. Remember, it's probably mainly mothers and adoptees that are replying to the consultation. But there was a couple of mentions of, bear in mind, redress, if we're making compensation, it's coming from the public purse. And I thought, did we need to be reminded of that?
Because it is directly connected to compensation and funding.
I just thought it was interesting. I thought we did not need to be reminded of gratitude and rescue. Maybe I was looking to be annoyed by it. It was a long document, a long summer, but the human rights bit, it just gave me pause, and I really thought maybe this is an activity for a postdoc. If we were to do up a list of which violations are systemic and which violations are proper human rights violations, does it come down to justiciability, if you can take them to court or not? But I thought they were nearly putting limits on it before they were taking the testimony. So I wonder, will they be excluding evidence of mothers, victims, survivors, adoptees on the basis of, we don't need to hear about that because it's probably not falling under human rights violation. Maybe I'm forecasting and seeing doom for it has occurred. I just thought it was interesting that the emphasis on truth. I mean, here it's truth recovery.
I want to share my experience, my own experience, gathering evidences. When I wrote the book, The Global Orphan Adoption System and South Korea's Impact on its Origin and Development, this book is the English translation PhD dissertation. I wrote my dissertation in Korean, and I thought that it should be published in the language the adoptees understand, because it is the information about them, about their life. It is helpful to understand. Maybe this book is not helpful to do their individual birth family search, but at least it can be helpful for them to understand their adoption and the context, what really happened, and what was the law and policy and practice that have decided there.
This was another thing that came up over the summer when we were talking about redress.
Yeah.
And some adoptees were saying it's not about the money, and it's not even necessarily about having a statue or some sort of memorial, though that would be good. But for a lot of people, it was just about having their mother's story recorded and noted somewhere. In some cases, the mothers had passed away. But it was just that people would know, just getting the truth heard to make people sort of realize. And there was a bit of the notion that it's all very historic, that does not happen anymore. I don't know if it's not entirely correct. If, as you say, we look at Europe and the intercountry adoptions are being gradually stopped or slowed down. And over here, open adoptions are becoming more normative. So there's definitely a sea change. But I think, the emphasis I know for people I spoke to was very much on the truth aspect. That redress wasn't just about give us compensation. It was about we need to challenge some long-held opinions and assumptions. So I don't know if you've found the same with your evidence gathering.
Yes, and when I published this book, I only focus on the law between the laws of the South state of origin and the laws and policy and practice that really make this phenomena possible. The laws of state of origin and the laws of receiving countries. So I really did not have opportunity to see the real documents of adoptees. After I published this book, the adoptees from all over the world began to send their documents to me. That was the first time that I witnessed the real, orphan papers. And I can clearly see that it is completely wrong. Because, I have never seen. So those documents, just think about it. Those documents were produced to facilitate intercountry adoption process. So those documents were just, were produced and given between the government bodies who are related to in the process. Some people like me, we have never seen such a thing. I was born in Korea and have been living there for decades, and I have been working in the government, and I was educated, but I never seen such documents, which means that it was really total exclusion of society. Some people born in this country were totally excluded inside the private agencies when they were born, and even their birth certificates and their immigration papers were just handled in the power of private agencies. that was total exclusion and discrimination. If it is not a human rights violation, what is?
Absolutely. If you're being dehumanized either behind the high wall of the orphanage or the lost files, lost in a fire. I know I say this all the time, but, the redacted, even trying to access your files in adulthood, that's something that some jurisdictions are notorious for. For your own good, we can send you a little bit of your information, but you certainly can't have it all. You can't be trusted with, say, the name of your birth father. I don't know why. Well, maybe they're right to fear us. I don't. But yeah, it's mad that the templates of the last 100 years are still sort of lingering on. So you had adoption all being very informal and shady and secretive. And even yet, that has lingered on. And the lawmakers are tentative. They can only really gradually, they don't want to upset people, I guess. They don't want to cause a moral panic. So there's that tread softly, go so slowly. But the longer they wait, there are aging generations. It will come too late for them. Again, looking at Ireland, looking at England, but it's an interesting one.
At that point, I thought those individual adoptees documents can be the evidence of the state violence, the human rights violation, very gross human rights violation. In Korea, some group of lawyers with the HRBB, we are trying to make it some kinds of, I'm not so sure, because in South Korea, the action lawsuit, a class lawsuit, is not so common. The adoptees are living outside of South Korea. They are not residing inside South Korea. So it is kind of hard. We need to be creative.
Yes.
Don't have many cases prior to this.
This is the limitations of international law, of human rights law.
Right.
So cross-border maybe is where it starts to get
so that's why we should be very creative.
And anything that's seen as private or family life relevant can possibly also be seen as just a bit too problematic or a bit too complex. If we're trying to police human nature or find solutions to the unsolvable, what they really need is a time machine. So that
is the part that we need to be creative. Is I talked about truth and justice. Mm-hmm. A final suggestion is rectification. We need to rectify the situation. So everything is boiled down about the right to know their true origins of intercountry adoptees. If we cannot really trust the official documents produced by the government at the time, then what are we going to do? Maybe in the file rooms of private adoption agencies, we have no idea how trustworthy of their, files. But anyway, that can be the starting point. So what are we going to do? How we can rectify this situation as far as we can? That is the part we have to really create a whole new policy in order to restore the right to know their true identity, their origin of intercountry adoptees.
It's time for a new way of thinking or a new way of looking at it, given that law tries, but doesn't always quite get there. So you're in Europe for the next short while.
Yes.
So where after the delights of Belfast, where are you going to next?
For the last 2 years, I'm focusing on the receiving country's government because my energy and time resources are limited. So I need to target our strategy. So our target is receiving country's government. That can be the starting point, the powerful point to make changes and go on the movement. So I have been traveling to Sweden, Denmark, and the Netherlands, and I've been talking with the adoptee communities there. And recently I am providing consultations to the intercountry adoption authorities of those governments and also the investigation committees of those governments.
And these are countries that have either decided to stop being receiving countries, stopping intercountry adoption, or they're thinking about it?
Because they continued their own fact findings and investigations, and they find more evidences which support the argument of adoptees and, the researchers like me. So now I think if they understand fully all those circumstances, that stopping it, such practice, it's quite rational decision. What else can you do?
That's it. And the media seems to have picked up, they do love an atrocity. So I'm looking at Spain, the various jurisdictions where burial grounds or abuses have been discovered, and people continue to be very shocked. I don't know if as adoptees we're maybe not quite as shocked because we're so used to hearing the stories. It's interesting that now seems to be becoming a European issue, whereas before it would have been Canadian, Australian, the more far-flung. But it seems to be creeping ever closer when we're hearing, Spain and apologies coming from the Netherlands. And
I was interviewed by Australian and Canadian media, and it was already broadcasted or published. And also recently, PBS and AP made a huge report on this issue. And they are very young journalists. They know they understand better. I think young generation understand human rights better than older generations. And they are really playing key roles on the course of rectifying this situation. They're really starting to focus on the overarching injustice of the system, not only focusing on the individual cases. Yeah, when we are focused on individual cases, we tend to understand that some cases are bad, but some cases are good. So what I am saying to, receiving countries' government is that first, do your investigation in both sides, not only inside your country, but you have to see what is happening in the states of origin. And second one is, do not rely on the adoptees bringing to you their cases. Do not try to see as case by case, but you have to see the whole system, the injustice of the law and policy itself.
So much overlapping. I'm thinking, so here it's about adoptees, but also about birth mothers, but also you can't look at that in isolation from the systems, the Magdalene laundries, the workhouses. In South Korea, the comfort women are getting mentioned as well. So it's not just a bunch of angry adoptees. Actually, no, it's wider.
Yeah.
It's not just that, as you say, an individual issue.
So, yes, one event does not make complete change. It will go on and on.
Yes, and there's lessons for modern domestic policy, perhaps, because from the adoptee perspective, it's sometimes the same losses of origin, of kinship. Like it could be language, ethnicity, all those little things that make us human, and the limitations of the law in trying to address that. I guess that's us. We've covered. We can go now and start the revolution. No, so thank you so much for joining us today, because I know you're.
Thank you. I really did not imagine that I would have opportunity to speak about this issue.
It's great, Mike.
Sharing the idea with your community.
You'll meet the adoptees tonight and the other NGO, but it's just amazing the commonalities that, whether it's cross-border or within borders, the dehumanizing aspect of you can't have your information.
Right.
That's a key one, or the othering, that little subtle things that still go on and that maybe mark us apart.
Yes. So if it is human rights, it is my rights, and it is your rights, and it is the rights of the audience who are listening to this. It is your rights.
Yeah.
You should have something to talk about.
Well, thank you very much, and wish you the best for the rest of your European tour, but it makes you sound like a pop star. I know you have other institutions to visit, so thank you for taking the time to come here to Belfast to talk to us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Very grateful. Thank you.